So again, welcome to the first circle of this year's second session of Indigenous Math Education Symposium. You're in Circle 1C, and our first speaker is Courtney Fox. Thank you, Courtney.
I am Courtney, or as my family knows me as Eshbiaki, and thank you for joining me. I'm first just going to say, there we go, that I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the traditional territories and oral practices of the Blackfoot Nations, which includes Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, and the Tsuut'ina, Nakota, and the Métis. And then I'm just going to first give a little introduction about myself and just kind of how I got here, I guess. So as I mentioned, my name's Eshbiaki. I come from the Kainai Reserve, and for the past 7 years, I've been teaching grades 7 and 8 mathematics on the Tsuut'ina Nation. And as you can see in this picture here, I have 2 daughters. One is just turning 5 here in 2 weeks, and the other is 8 months. So my journey to becoming an educator wasn't always as straightforward. Growing up, I didn't connect or understand my Blackfoot heritage. The legacy of residential schools left a mark on my family, and my grandparents struggled to pass on their traditions and teachings for quite a while. As I grew up and got older, my curiosity was sparked, and I began to seek out answers. So that's who I went to my papa, which you can see in the bottom left picture. That's me and him. And I began asking him questions, and he began sharing stories and talking about residential schools a bit more. And he later became a teacher himself, and he actually taught me in university for a short while, and he was a well-known Blackfoot translator. My Nana, you can see in the top right picture with my 2 girls, she still struggles to this day to share, but every now and then I can get a few little things out of her. And the reason I share this is because this is why I am here today, and this is kind of why I'm on this journey right now. So I want my students and my daughters to see themselves in me and have access to their culture and language and stories in a way that is meaningful. So over the past 7 years, it's been a continuous adventure of discovery. I've piloted different teaching methods, experimented with new lessons, and for the past 3 years, I've even implemented a self-paced classroom model to create a welcoming space where my students feel safe and empowered to learn at their own pace, free from the anxieties of falling behind, especially under circumstances that may not be their own fault. So now with this foundation in place, I'm embarking on a new chapter, and I'm weaving more cultural elements, stories, and connections to the community into my lessons. And it's an ongoing process, and it's just begun over the last probably year or 2. So I'm just sharing kind of small things that I'm doing right now and where I'm going to kind of go with that later. There we go. So while I saw progress in my students' math development after implementing the self-paced classroom, I also noticed persistent challenges in some areas. Students were having a fear of math. They were also grappling with a lack of motivation or unwillingness to take risks, which led them to skip class or have negative self-talk. And perhaps the biggest hurdle that I was seeing was a disconnect with the content itself. Students frequently ask me, when will I ever use this? Why do I need to know this? This doesn't relate to me. So this is kind of why I started embarking around this. So I'm working just today to show you one small thing that I do, and this is the outcome that I looked at. So demonstrate an understanding of central tendency by range, so mean, median, mode, and range. And the goal of it was to explore data at the powwow with friends and family. So it was just a small way to get the math into the community. So what needed to happen first? So this is what happens. This is what kind of steps I take between every lesson that I have tried, and they're in no particular order. So first I had to look at what the research says, which I'll get into that a little bit more. And then we have to learn the basic concepts being taught in order to utilize it, especially in this situation at the powwow where I might not be as easily accessible as I would be in a classroom because they may be with their friends or their families. And then we discuss the importance of place. And in this particular instance, I actually reached out to our culture teacher as I didn't feel like I knew how to answer that in the perspective of Tsuut'ina people. And then I contacted home to parents and guardians to discuss expectations and get their involvement. And we also talked to the creators or the organizers of the powwow about getting the students to share their data after and how we could utilize that data. And then I needed to create kind of a handout for them. So when I was looking at the research, this was a quote that stuck with me. Students' ownership and engagement are much more likely to emerge when students have had a chance to participate in the creation of their own learnings. For this assignment, I followed this quote. So I gave the students a chance to either choose a topic of their own in a small group or by themselves, and they could complete their own data on a topic that they felt was important, or we could look at it as a class and choose a topic together. So as my students were just starting to move outside of their comfort zone, they chose to complete the assignment as a class, and we would compare our answers at the end. So we took a vote and came to the consensus that we'd be collecting data at the education powwow that they would be attending. There we go. So throughout throughout the whole process of this, I was looking at these three questions: what happened here, what is happening here now, and in what direction is this place headed, and what should happen here. Now, when I looked at these are Greenwood's guided critical guiding questions, or I can't remember the exact wording of that. And these questions underneath are all questions that we talked about as a class, and they came up with these questions, and then we just kind of looked at answering them throughout each step. What happened here? What is the history of each dance? Or what is the significance of where we're located? What is the significance of the dance itself? Or what is happening here and what direction is this place headed? Why do you think some of the dance categories had vastly different large numbers than others, which you'll see in the data that I share later? And then where do we go next? What needs to happen here? Does anything need to change? So these are all questions that the kids came up with. And then these were my expectations. I'm just gonna minimize this thing. There we go. Throughout this assignment. So they had to choose a minimum of one age category to watch and document. So if we were looking at, if they wanted to watch the teen boys, then they needed to watch all the dances in the teen boys category. If they wanted to watch the junior adults, then they needed to watch all the dances in that category. They could work with a partner or a group of 3 to help with the counting, and their families were also encouraged to take part in this. And then once all of the background work was done, all other work had to be done individually, and then they needed to show their data in a circle graph.
Don't have around here.
So here is the data. I created this handout, and they were able to do it either digitally on an iPad or their phone, or they could bring a paper copy with them. This one here was done on an iPad, I believe, because the writing's a bit neater than the couple I got on a phone. So if you can see here on the sides, where all the categories: teen girls, teen boys, senior adult, and they had to count all of these dancers that competed in that category and then total them up. And then on the other side, you can see they were finding the mean, median, mode range of each. All right, results. So I saw just from this one activity an increased engagement. And working with math with their community and their families, their parents were feeling less anxiety around helping them with their work. I was seeing a lot of the parents say that they couldn't help with the math work because they themselves were either bad at math or didn't understand the math. And this was such a small aspect in which they could feel comfortable to help their kids. It was easy to count. It was easy the kids were showing them how to calculate the mean, and they were calculating it together. And then it was relatable. They could see themselves in the data. And even if they weren't participating in the powwow themselves, they could see their friends and their family participating in the powwow. And then they were excited about math. They were excited to see how it worked in their daily lives. Even if they weren't a part of that, they could see how it related to their community. And then I don't have time to go through everything that I have done over the last couple years. But the top right, you can see the Tsuut'ina numbers. And this is just something that we do every single day. It's just a small way that they can practice their language. So I keep these numbers up on the board for probably the first half of the year. And we look at answering our problems. When we do oral problems, we look at answering them in Tsuut'ina. And then as the year goes on, I take the numbers off, and they usually, with the help of a couple of friends, can answer all questions orally without any support from the board. And then if you look down here where it says Act 2, and you can see like the fabric land, this was a 3-act task that I created, where they had to pick between 2 coupons, which was either 10% off their entire order or $10 off per feet of fabric. And they worked with small groups to figure out, they used their shopping list and they had to figure out which coupon was the better deal. And then we went, and I had already purchased all of the materials for it. But then they went to the store, which was in the school, and they actually purchased their items and created mini versions of ribbon skirts. The goal is to eventually get to making larger ribbon skirts for around Mother's Day to give to their auntie, uncle, or auntie, not uncle, auntie, grandparents, mom, sister, whoever they want to give it to, and create full-size ones. But we didn't have the time or the resources at the time, so we just did little mini ones. I think this one's about this big. And then on the bottom right, you can see us working with one of the culture teachers, and we're building a teepee. And I've been looking to bring more math opportunities to their culture lessons. So this one in particular, we were discussing if you could find circumference, radius, and diameter of the base of a teepee, and why or why not that worked. And then lastly, where to next? So where I plan to go next is, you can see here, these are a couple of our cultural activities. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on in order to bring that culture in naturally into math lessons, instead of trying to push it into the curriculum, maybe not as authentically. So you can see on the bottom left here is a picture of the buffalo. Every couple of years we do the buffalo kill. And so there's an opportunity for math in there, in looking at the types of buffalo, the how many we have, how we're going to get when they kill the buffalo, they put that food into the reserve. So how can we fit math into that? And then we have the teepee rising here in the middle. And then there's ribbon skirt making, and again with the teepees. So this is kind of where I'm looking to go. And I'm also looking to bring in how stories can how we can bring stories into mathematics, and what our working with our culture teachers and our language teachers on how we can find math easily in those stories, and how we can use those to enrich our curriculum. Because I find that oftentimes I feel like I'm trying to slam the curriculum into the culture, and I'm trying to instead take a step back, and maybe it doesn't always fit into my classroom, but how can I find it in other ways? So yeah, that's it. And
Thank you so much.
Sorry, I think you guys will get this, and I do have the links for all of those if you'd like them. So I did a Bridging Worlds paper that has the lesson plan with different, it's not just the powwow, there's also different opportunities like tree circumference and stuff like that. And then the handout as well.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. If you could pop those links into the chat, that would be great. But we'll also post them onto the Indigenous Math Network website as well. If you want to email those to me, I can get those posted.
For sure.
I'm just going to spotlight Courtney right now. And we're going to open, we have time for about 6 minutes or so of questions or comments. Just like to sort of start with this idea about, I know that tension about what you forefront in terms of the math or the cultural practices. And I know that that's a tension for lots of educators, and appreciate you sharing your tensions with that. And I'm just wondering, for the participants that are joining us, Courtney shared cultural practices such as powwows and the use of teepees, and just thinking about connections you might be making to your own local cultural practices, wherever it is that you're joining us from. And maybe Courtney might have some ideas to share around that. But we'll open it up for any questions or comments that participants have. Give everyone some think time.
I don't have a hand. I don't know. Like, I'm trying to look for my hand to put it up. So
That's okay. Just go.
okay, I'll just start talking. I think you're doing a wonderful, wonderful job. So I'm just trying to put my face on there. Sorry. I work in Ontario, and I love everything you're doing, and I can totally relate to the whole piece about trying to make it more authentic, like the math more authentic. So I think you're doing fabulous. My question is actually about your guided learning model. Like, I think that's a really excellent approach, but I just feel like I'm not sure how do you make that work? Or is that too big of a question, maybe?
What do you mean in sense of like self-guided?
Like, I thought you talked about like a self-paced learning
yeah.
model. Yeah.
Yeah. So this took me a while to kind of hone in on what worked for my school, but I'm not sure if you've ever looked at the Modern Classroom. They run a self-guided or I guess like PD on self-guided learning and teaching. And so I kind of took that PD and then ran with it and did what worked for my classroom. So in grade 7 and 8, we often have a lot of attendance concerns. And I was seeing that a lot of kids were coming in and out, and then they were 2 or 3, 4 lessons behind, and then they would just give up because they're too far behind now. There's no point on catching up. I might as well just not come to school. So I wanted to bring them into class and not feel overwhelmed. So what I've done is that usually Mondays, but sometimes it's a different day, we do what I would classify as like a full class lesson, which is where I would introduce whatever topic we're talking about, and basically give that, I guess you would say, at the front of the classroom instruction. And then from there, I break down what skills they need to practice. And there's usually 2 or 3 lessons after that where they can practice this. And sometimes we'll do like an art activity or a cultural activity to practice that skill. And at each end of each lesson, they have a small exit ticket that shows me basically what they know. So instead of this big, massive unit test at the end of the unit, they've just done tiny little exit tickets throughout to show their learning. And then there's less of that anxiety of, oh my God, I have a unit test and I missed half of the lessons and I'm just going to fail it. And then there's all this negative self-talk and they hate math. And so I've seen that this has actually made math, like if you'd ask my grade 7 and 8 team, math is like the fan favorite downstairs. And they actually feel a sense of relief coming in the classroom because they know that no matter when they come into the classroom, they're starting off where they left off. Because some of our kids stay home to take care of little siblings, or they can't get a ride to school, or whatever their circumstance may be. And this just makes math more accessible to them. And then I've just been kind of learning how to bring those cultural aspects into that self-paced lesson, because that's what I was noticing was the biggest drawback of this method, was that cultural piece was missing. So again, I'm actually on maternity leave this year. So I'm next year is my goal to bring those stories and more culture like I've done in the previous year into those self-paced lessons. And how that looks, I'm not quite sure yet. I've only done a few of them. But I did notice that this helped my kids feel more confident in school.
Thanks, Courtney. I just want to take a question from Judith, and then we're going to need to move on to our second speaker, but Judith has had her hand up, so I want to make sure she has time for her question.
Yeah.
It's my timer.
I really, really love what you did. And I was really curious about the questions I saw in your the powwow questions. You had questions about why some dances had more people than others, and I was just really curious how your students felt about doing the counts at the powwow, and did they how did they feel about doing that analysis? Did it answer questions that they were intrigued about?
Yeah, so one question in particular that they really honed in on was the why do you think some dance categories have vastly larger numbers than others? And I'll just tell you what the number was, but if you were to look at like the teen girls fancy had like 24 dancers, but then if you looked at like the I believe it was the senior adult women, it was like 9 or 10 dancers. And so they were discussing as a class, like, is it because fancy is more like there's more like movement in it, and maybe they need to be younger and in shape, and so they're grappling with like, well, if I get older, will I not be able to do fancy dance anymore? And then also jingle dancing is a really popular dance, and actually my daughter jingle dances, and I remember when I told one of my students, oh yeah, my daughter's doing her first powwow this year, they were like, let me guess, she's a jingle dancer. And I was like, yeah, she is. And when we brought up that question, they were like, they thought that jingle dancing was the most popular because when you're little, you like that sound and you're like the jingles. And so they were like, so all the little girls like that, and then they just stick with it. So there's such big numbers in these categories because they start out as a young girl liking the sound of the jingles, which is exactly why my daughter chose the jingle dance. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Courtney, for sharing your learning and your thinking and the tensions that you're feeling around this. And congratulations on your maternity leave as well. Hope you're enjoying this time home with your children. We're going to shift over now to our next speaker. We were to have a team together, but we have Matteo, who is joining us from just south of British Columbia, down in the Bellingham area. I'm just trying to find him. There he is. Matteo, welcome. And so I'm just going to spotlight Matteo here. And it looks like he's got Florence, Italy in the background. I think this is where Matteo is from, if you have read the background of Matteo. And Matteo, are you going to share your screen? Did you want to practice that at all? Okay. I think we should be okay. So I'm just going to turn it over to you. You're welcome to introduce yourself and tell the group a little bit about yourself, and then share what you've been thinking about.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Matteo Tamburini. I was born and I grew up in Florence. This is the view. My background is the view from my window of my childhood bedroom. We live in an apartment building in the town of Pistoia. My screen name says Unit 202 because I was in a condo association meeting last night and I don't have the option to rename myself. I was going to change to the fact that I work. So anyway, I work at Northwest Indian College, which is a tribally controlled college that is run by the Lummi Nation, that was chartered by the Lummi Nation, but serves a variety of other tribes here in Washington State and Idaho. I was going to present with Kayshish Pichette-Cline, former student at Northwest Indian College, current math student at Western Washington University, but she had a family commitment that she could not get out of. So you were stuck with just me tonight.
Matteo, I'm just going to let you know that your
Yeah,
slides
you can see.
left. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Well,
Okay.
I guess or here, sure. Let's do this is how I do when I normally teach, but let's just do the full slideshow so that way you don't get any spoilers. So just again, I said I shared a little bit about me, but the town of Pistoia, I circled there on the right. That's me with my son last summer. And then the bottom picture is me with some of my colleagues at Northwest Indian College's graduation a couple of years ago. And in part, the reason why I share this picture is that I grew up in Italy, and so my knowledge and understanding of Indigenous people in any of the United States, or let alone in the Pacific Northwest, was very, very limited. When I started working at Northwest Indian College in 2009, this was the math, very conventional math textbook that we used. But we were very lucky in that a couple of years later, we went to a professional development workshop by an organization called the Mathematics Education Collaborative. And we began to teach algebra. I teach algebra in 10-week-long quarters. So we began to, instead of using what was in the textbook, we began to use patterns like these to teach them, to teach the content. But after we began to use these sort of generic patterns, which already I felt like were a tremendous improvement over what was in the textbook, it became hard not to notice that all of the beadwork that the students either made or used or were just carrying around with them had a lot of this type of algebraic pattern embedded in it. And so we began to play with that idea, and in somewhere in there, we went on a field trip. Some of the math faculty went on a field trip to the Museum of Anthropology at UBC, actually. And when we came back, we came up with this pattern. I think we were inspired by a picture of one of the set of moccasins that were on the exhibit. And so we began to use patterns like these, asking students to describe what they were seeing, to generalize what they were seeing. We began to use them. And I have a quick snippet here of some of the work. This is not the student's first draft. This is not average work. I think that this is the work of a student who has really invested a lot of time in explaining what they're seeing. But this is the type of work that the students wind up doing with some of the in this case, it's a beading pattern that the student is working on. Along with using patterns that among the faculty created in collaboration with some of our tutors, one of the assignments that we began to do is at the end of the quarter, the students have the option of submitting their own pattern. And so gradually, here's an example of a pattern that was made by a student. And so gradually we have been replacing, or our curriculum is increasingly made with designs and patterns that are made by students. And so this is an example of that. Kayshish sort of came in when she began taking math courses at Northwest Indian College. She came sort of in this phase of the work. And so her and I have had, conversations. We've engaged in this math together. She's she has taught our Foundations of Algebra course using this approach. And then one day, she's also a beater, and one day she shared these earrings that she made with me, and I began to notice that, so at this point, okay, I was curious, okay, so I don't know if you can see here, but it alternates completely black and then with color, and then completely black and then with color. And her and I began to talk about the fact that the inner colored ring here, this one is completely symmetric. Like the beads, quote unquote, worked out so that the pattern exactly repeats itself. But then we began to talk about the fact that this outer ring is not completely symmetric. There's one piece of the pattern that doesn't completely replicate what the rest of the earring is like. And so we began to talk about, oh, well, was this inner the fact that this inner ring worked, was that intentional? Was that an accident? If you were going to, we began to have all this conversation about that. And as a result of that conversation, Kayshish was like, well, my grandmother, she makes earrings, and her earrings like do not have this issue. They always work out. Always work out like that. Now, I haven't had an opportunity to talk with Mrs. Cline yet, but I don't think that you get 7 pointed stars on accident. I suspect that. I'm eager to have a conversation about that. 7 pointed stars and then 13 pointed stars. You'll notice there's 7 pointed stars on this inner round, but then there's a 13 pointed star around the outside. And this sort of speaks to the direction that I think that, one of the prompts that we had to think about was, where are we going next? And I think that examples like these, if you will, these are examples where you sort of engage with the math as a spectator, as someone who sees the design and tries to superimpose perhaps math onto it in some way. But there is math that is involved in the making of a variety of these, I'm going to call them cultural products, for lack of a better word. And on my timer, I still have a minute, so I'm going to go a little bit beyond this. As part of doing this work, at some point, our Dean of Indigenous Education invited me, because she had some visitors, Chief Janice George from the Squamish Nation, who was coming to teach some things at Northwest Indian College. And as a result of, and so she invited me to go talk to them about some of the math that is involved when they weave with wool. And so this is too much to look at, but the basic thing that I observed and that I talked with them about is that, imagine that you have a weave, you have a loom, and your loom has 60 warps, and you want to somehow incorporate this triangle, let's call it. Maybe you want to incorporate it so that it fits all the way across, but clearly this layout is undesirable. You would not want this to end like that, nor would you want to be short. I think that ideally you would want it to be centered. And I would imagine that if you have to decide ahead of time where to make it start, you have to do some math ahead of time to decide that. And so this is sort of the direction, the thinking that we are engaged with now is, I feel like following right along with what Courtney was talking about of, rather than perhaps, again, finding the math in the product, like trying to uncover the math that is already naturally part of the work. I think that was exactly my time.
It was. That was very well done, Matteo. Amazing sharing and amazing connection to, again, our local, cultural context here with the MOA, and also with Chief Janice George's work, who's been a friend of our network. So at this time, again, this is a time to open up conversation. We have 6 minutes for questions or comments or feedback to Matteo on the work that they're doing. And someone might be curious, actually, a little bit more about the college. Vanessa's got her hand up. She might have a question. She also teaches at the college level. Go ahead, Vanessa.
Yes. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. Okay. So Matteo, as a fellow college instructor just on the other side of the border at UFV, University of the Fraser Valley, I'm really inspired by your work and wondering, do you have some of the materials that you've developed available, open access? Is that something that you're planning on extending?
There is, I'd be glad to send some by email. There is a grand, ambitious plan. So as the students have been submitting their work, I asked them to fill out a consent form. And so there is an ambitious plan at some point to make a web repository of the work that the students have made to be shared for people. But yes, but I would be glad to share some of the assignments that that the students have made.
Yeah, we're in the process of revising our pre-calculus class, and our institution has a real focus on indigenization of curricula. And so being able to kind of draw upon that as we're doing that revision would be amazing. And I think the applications, I just want to commend you, are really beautiful mathematical pieces that you found, and your students are incredibly fortunate because you've put a lot of thought and effort into this material. It's great to see.
Yeah, just in terms of pre-calculus, I don't know anything about bentwood boxes, but the conventional pre-calculus problem of maximizing something, I have something like that I think is really awesome. Beyond the scope of what I teach in my Foundations of Algebra class, but really awesome stuff.
Thank you. And someone's posted in the chat making a connection to Ruth Beattie's work from the Ontario region of Canada and the work around beading that she's done across grades. And then someone mentioned around series and sequences from grade 11 and making that connection as well with beading. And again, for those of you that are on the coastal region of British Columbia, beading wasn't necessarily a cultural practice, but the connection to weaving in the design, whether it's wool weaving or cedar weaving, the same mathematical applications in terms of those growing and repeating patterns are embedded in those practices. So it crosses, materials, which is also kind of interesting to explore in terms of the materiality of the work as well, and how that different materials lends itself to different mathematics. And I'm wondering if anyone else has other connections or questions coming up. I don't know if you know Matteo. Until someone else jumps in, I'll just chat. Last year or 2 years ago, we did a project with a beater, and why can't I remember his name? Someone help me. Oh my goodness. But we were doing the peyote style build. Nico, thank you, Judith. Nico Williams. And we looked at, embedded beading practice and contemporary beading practices in Indigenous cultures. So much mathematics embedded. And thank you, Annie. Yes, I had a little mind blip there for a minute.
I want to add one thing, even when we are doing the weaving, there also even that the pattern is there when in the coordinate geometry, all coordinates that also we can use in that in the weaving pattern. Even in the art of Indigenous culture, one is there in Victoria Island. I know, just forget his name, but he is also very good in art, because all the salmon on he is actually making in kind of paintings, all the different kinds of painting and using the different kind of patterns. Yeah, it's really very helpful, and good to know.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, everyone. Well, I think Anita is going to pop the feedback form for the symposium in the chat. And we have one more circle session coming up, the second round, but we have a 5-minute sort of wellness break from the screen. And thank you so much, Courtney and Matteo, for sharing in this circle. We so appreciate your contributions and your thoughts on this really important work.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Great. Thank you, everyone.